now for the climate change, global warming. Cher, are you ready? Come on down. Let's give Cher Gilmore a big hand. I'll put your presentation up.
Well, I want to thank you also for the opportunity of allowing me to speak to you tonight. This will be a new adventure for me. I've never used one of these before. So we'll see how it goes. So tonight I have two messages for you, and both of them are equally important. The first message is not so good, and that is that our planet is in very deep trouble. But the second message is more positive. There is a solution, and it isn't yet too late to save the planet. So let's go to the bad news first and get that out of the way. The bottom line of this is that we are rapidly destroying the planetary life support systems that we all depend on to live. And these are some of the symptoms and the evidence of that. We have unprecedented glacier melt. This is causing the seas to rise and threatens our coastal cities like New York, Washington, D.C., New Orleans. We have a loss of fresh water for millions where they depend on the glaciers for their drinking water, such as the Ganges. And we have island nations being gradually submerged by the sea rising. Even Huntington Beach has started to see signs of the sea rise. So this is a serious problem, and it is forever. Once the glaciers leave, they are not going to come back. So it's incumbent upon us to do something as soon as possible if we want to have glaciers. Another symptom is that the oceans are acidifying at a very rapid rate. They're 30% more acid than they were at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And this means that the shells of crustaceans are not able to form. The rising acidity kills off certain marine life. It's destroying our coral reefs, and they are the home of thousands of species of marine life. So we are really gradually killing off our ocean life. Another symptom is excessive heat causing long-lasting drought, or alternating drought and flooding, and wildfires. And we all know what happens when we have alternating drought and flooding. It washes away our topsoil, so that makes agriculture difficult. We now are seeing symptoms in our Great Plains that are like they were in the Dust Bowl era. That was a decade, which is troubling, to say the least. We have more and more wildfires, such as the one that was recently in Australia and may still be going. The ones in New Mexico and Colorado last year. Even the great Amazon rainforest is beginning to dry up, and they are starting to experience wildfires, if you can believe that, our rainforest. And this is one of their major sources of oxygen for the planet. And I just learned something recently that I didn't know before, and I think it was totally shocking. Trees can get so stressed by the heat that they actually start giving off carbon dioxide instead of oxygen. So that further depletes our oxygen supply and adds more carbon to the air, which increases global warming, of course. Another symptom is global disruption of our weather patterns, as we've certainly seen with Superstorm Sandy. That's hard to say. The excess water being absorbed into the atmosphere causes the things like floods and hurricanes and tornadoes to be juiced up, so to speak, so they become more frequent, more fierce, and more destructive. And then one of the most troubling symptoms to me is the fact that we're losing our species. I read a study in Nature that was published in 2004, and it said by the time we reach 2 degrees Celsius increase in temperature, over a third of all species, and that's over 1 million species, will be committed to extinction. I just find that terrifying. So what does science say about this? Is it true that humans are causing global warming? Well, according to science, yes, it is. The U.S. Global Change Research Program says global warming is unequivocal and primarily human-induced. And this is scientists from 8 departments of our government, from NASA to the EPA to the Department of Defense, Department of Agriculture, the State Department, and so forth. The National Academy of Sciences said the need for urgent action to address climate change is now indisputable. And that is along with 12 other countries who say the same thing, their academies of sciences. Brazil, Canada, China, France, Germany, India, Italy, Japan, Mexico, Russia, South Africa, and the UK. All of the academies of science say, yes, this is true. Climate change is indisputable. And we have to take urgent action. In fact, there are no national or major scientific institutions anywhere in the world that dispute the fact that human activities are causing climate change. 98% of the world's climate scientists are in agreement. So we have a problem. Now, this is a graph of 13,950 peer-reviewed climate articles that were written between 1991 and 2012. Do you see that little thin sliver at the top of red? Those are the 24 articles that reject global warming or endorse a cause other than carbon dioxide emissions. So there is no scientific doubt that global warming is here and it's caused by humans. What we do have is the fossil fuel industry that is continuing to sow doubt and put forward disinformation to avoid what they know is inevitable, that we will eventually have to deal with carbon emissions. The problem is we need to be doing that now. In fact, we need to have done it yesterday if we want to keep our planet habitable. According to Bill McKibben, there are 3 numbers that are very important for everyone to know. And Bill McKibben is one of our leading environmentalists and the author of several books. He says that these 3 numbers add up to global catastrophe. Now, this is the first number. It's 2 degrees Celsius. This is the amount we can raise the global temperature and still have a relatively safe environment. And some scientists question whether it's still safe at that level. And this is by international agreement. Scientists all over the world agree that this is as far as we can go in terms of global warming if we want to survive. Now, the problem is we've already raised the average temperature 0.8 degrees Celsius. And because the delays of carbon are, the effects of carbon are delayed, if we stopped putting out carbon in the atmosphere tomorrow, we would still raise the temperature another 0.8 degrees from what we've already done, the delayed effects. So that would bring us about 3/4 of the way to 2 degrees Celsius. So things are happening very rapidly, and we have to do something very quickly if we want to stop this. I also want to say that this is not like the variation in temperature from day to day that we see on our thermometers outside our homes. This is like the planet having a fever. And you know that when you have a fever, if you have 102, 103, that's pretty bad and you're pretty sick. If you get to 104, 105, you are brain dead. And if you get to 106, you probably are not going to live. So to give you a sense of this, during our last ice age, the average global temperature was only 6 degrees colder than it is today. And we are, according to scientists, on a trajectory of a 6-degree increase, 6 degrees Celsius hotter than what it was before the Industrial Revolution. And keep in mind that we're almost to 2 degrees Celsius. So this is pretty scary. Now, the next 2 numbers The next number is 565 gigatons. Now, this is the amount of carbon dioxide scientists agree we can still pump into the atmosphere and stay below that 2 degrees Celsius temperature rise. 2,795 gigatons is the amount of carbon dioxide contained in the world's proven fossil fuel reserves. And as far as I can tell, the fossil fuel companies have every indication of wanting to burn all of this, and not only this, but anything else that they can find to burn. You'll notice that that second number is about 5 times larger than the first number, which is all we can burn if we want to keep it below 2 degrees. So this is very scary, I think. We've got to keep those fossil fuels in the ground if we want to survive. So what does this mean locally for us as the temperature heats up? Well, it means smaller snowpacks, which will reduce our stream flow. It means because of that, we will have diminishing freshwater supplies with less stream flow. With earlier melting, we'll have heavier spring floods. We'll have, with drier summers, drought, insect infestations, and wildfires that we've already started experiencing. We'll continue to have rising food prices as we have crop failures and shortages. And some of you might know that we have specialty crops in California that depend on the temperatures being below a certain level for a certain period of time in order for the fruit or nuts to set. Well, if it gets too hot and they don't get those conditions to grow and fruit, then we won't have those crops to enjoy. I personally will miss those things. And lastly, we will have more heat strokes, respiratory illness, and mosquito-borne diseases. And I'm sure some of you are already aware that we have West Nile virus in our local area already. One study published in the Journal of the National Academy of Sciences said that they project California's water declines if we get to a 2-degree world, or you could say when we get to a 2-degree world, declines of between 1/3 and 3/4. That's a lot of water that we won't have. They also predict heat waves in LA will quadruple, and droughts will occur 50% more often. So this is kind of sobering when we think about all these new developments that are being planned to bring in more people that will also need water. Now, this is a comparison of overall California above and Santa Clarita below in terms of temperature trends. And you'll see that the line for Santa Clarita is a bit steeper than it is for California in general. That means that Santa Clarita is getting hotter faster than California as a whole. So that doesn't bode well for us. And in a 2-degree world, the prediction is that the whole interior half of the United States is going to be more or less a desert, with conditions even worse than they were in the Dust Bowl. So that's the end of the bad news from me, and certainly that's bad enough. I find it very scary, and when I learned all this, I found it also activating. I wanted to find out what I could do personally to make a difference, what I could be effective at doing to make a difference. So I looked around at the various environmental organizations, and there are many of them, but there's not a lot you can do on a day-to-day basis to make a change in most of them. But finally, I found the Citizens Climate Lobby, and I liked it because it's non-confrontational, it's nonpartisan, and it works effectively. First, a little background. Marshall Saunders is the founder, and he worked for about 20 years with Results Citizens Lobby, and that was for the purpose of ending hunger and poverty. He personally arranged over 1 million small loans to poor families around the world, and he was ultimately given the Grameen Foundation Humanitarian Award in 2009, which normally only goes to heads of state. So he's a pretty impressive guy. So he knew that Results got results, because over the 30 years that it was in existence, the U.S. foreign aid budget went from $25 million that it was when Results started to the $1.3 billion that it is today. And this was largely because of results lobbying and the microcredit programs that we lobbied for. Well, in 2007, Marshall had an epiphany. He realized that many of the loans that he had made in countries like Bangladesh, which are at sea level, would be actually washed away because of global warming if the seas began to rise, because Bangladesh would be put underwater. So all the work that he spent his life doing up to that point would be gone. So he decided that he had to spend the rest of his life working on climate change. And he looked around for an organization that was organized the way Results was, and he couldn't find one. So he started Citizens Climate Lobby himself using the Results model. So what is the purpose of Citizens Climate Lobby? It's to create the political will for a stable climate and to empower individuals to exercise their personal and political power. Our ultimate goal is to pass effective climate legislation through Congress, and what we specifically support is a gradually increasing tax on carbon with all the revenues returned to households. We also believe that fossil fuels subsidies should all end. And we think that the carbon taxes would be the fastest, simplest, and most effective and efficient means of stopping carbon emissions, faster than any other way that's been proposed. Now here's a little cartoon showing Obama wanting to quench the fires of climate change and debt in the 21st century. And he's looking around for ideas where right behind him is the fire hydrant of the carbon tax, which would solve the problems. Actually, a lot of newspapers around the country are supporting the idea of a carbon tax as a solution, as we do. And it's largely because of the work that we've done. So how do we create political will? Well, we're organized into teams loosely based on congressional districts. And right now we have more than 80 groups in 33 states. We write op-eds, which is pieces that are opposite the editorials in a newspaper. We write articles, letters to the editor, and meet with our editorial boards of the local papers to, you could say, educate them about the issue of climate change and try to get them on board with supporting a carbon tax publicly. We speak in our community about the problem and solutions, as I'm doing today, and we write to and meet with our congressional representatives. That is, we lobby and we write to the president. We train and empower ourselves in various ways. We meet monthly for a national conference call and afterwards for local action. And this usually takes place on the first Saturday of the month for about 2 hours, from 10 to 12. The first hour is the conference call, and then we meet locally as a group. On the call, the national part of the call, we're educated by expert guest speakers such as scientists, economists, and politicians, showing us how the best way is to lobby them. And we practice short laser talks to learn to speak powerfully, and we commit to one or more specific actions that month, and we follow up on those. And those actions could be writing an op-ed or writing a letter to the editor. It could be writing a letter to the president or our congressional representatives, any of those things. So what has CCL accomplished so far? We have published an economic report, Building a Green Economy, that we use as a resource for our congressional representatives and the media. We have written our own legislative proposal for the carbon tax that I spoke of. It's called the Carbon Fee and Dividend Act. And we have written a lot of letters to the editor and had lots of meetings with Congress and written and published a lot of op-eds. And we're just about doubling or more than doubling the number of each of those things every year. So we're growing fast. But the best thing that we've done, in my opinion, is that we have caused a carbon tax to be seriously discussed in Washington. Up until about 3 months ago, it was anathema to talk about a tax, a carbon tax, or any other kind of tax in Washington. But now it's the talk of the town. And in fact, Senator Bernie Sanders and our own Senator Boxer are writing up a carbon tax bill right now. So we think that's very good news. So to learn more, if you're interested in finding out more detail about Citizens Climate Lobby, and you're invited to dial in to one of our toll-free 1-hour introductory conference calls any Wednesday. They're from 5 to 6 p.m. Pacific time. You don't have to say anything. You'll just hear our executive director tell about how it started, what it does, and so forth. You can also visit the website. There's a lot of information there, citizensclimatelobby.org. And I'm going to close with a quote from our executive director, Mark Reynolds. He says, "Politicians don't create political will. They respond to it." So it's up to us to create the political will to stop climate change. We have to, if we want to have a livable world. Now, what I've done is start a Santa Clarita chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. I started it in January. So if you're interested in becoming involved, I invite you to put your name on the sheets on a clipboard that I'll have in that second row over there, and join us. And I also have some little sheets of paper that have the phone number if you want to participate in the introductory conference call. So I hope you're interested in getting involved, and I thank you for hearing what I had to say. And I'm sorry it was so negative.